Hey, how's it going? Rockley Smiley here. I just wanted to talk about Marathon for a few minutes. This is the new extraction shooter from Bungie coming up very soon. I got to try the server slam, played about 4 or 5 hours of it, and I did it live on my Twitch channel. Had some opinions, and I wanted to share some of those, and maybe solicit your opinions as well, because I've been finding it to be a very divisive game. So divisive, in fact, that I feel like their subreddit has gone a little bit feral and they're sort of turning into a cult, maybe? It's weird. I'm not really sure what to make of it. So Marathon, to me, is a very important series. It's a FPS from the early 90s that got me into the modding scene, helped me kind of get my head around, level design, how 3D level design works, learned a little bit about animation. I learned how to do 3D modeling so I could work on a total conversion. It was a big deal for me as I was a kid. And I thought the fact that they were returning to this series was going to be a massive thing. I thought we were going to get like a proper narrative-based FPS, solo game, rather than, a live service game, extraction shooter. And, well, regardless, I wanted to give it a go just to see how related it seemed to be to the original, or if it was very much at all. And yeah, I don't know if it's that related. I mean, they make some obvious name checks to the old series, and there are very direct references in that there are terminals with text lore bits in there. But yeah, anyway, that's kind of besides the point. I wanted to talk a little bit about how I felt about the game, having played it now. I'm not a massive fan of extraction shooters. I really like Witchfire, and that one is exclusively PvE. There is no multiplayer in Witchfire, and I think that's great. It's got a really cool, mysterious bunch of maps, lots of sort of meta-game things to accomplish. You always feel like you're kind of making a little bit of headway in Witchfire with the things you're collecting, the various story elements kind of piecing themselves together for you. And I kind of felt the opposite based on what I saw in the server slam. And I guess I should caveat this as I am aware this is like, it's just to test how many people they can get on the server to make sure that things are running smoothly. It's not necessarily representative of the entire game, but it also is coming out in a few days. So it's like the server slam and the actual game release are like 5 days apart or so. I guess you could look at it sort of like a preview/demo, but there may be things I don't know that I don't know. I didn't get the impression I was missing out on a ton, though, because we did get to see 2 out of the 3 launch maps, and my impressions of, like, the general bones of the game were fine. The aiming and shooting felt quite good. It was juicy, it was responsive, it felt punchy, visceral. It felt nice to move around the world. I mean, the world was very vivid. The art style seems to be divisive depending on who you ask. I happen to think it's cool at times, but I also think it's not great at other times. And I guess what I mean by that is it's both very bold in using tons of crazy colors, combinations that you would never usually see. Does have a sort of surreal feeling to it. And there's some fantastic skyboxes and some very interesting structure situations, but they're kind of few and far between when they really give you a feeling of awe. Underneath that very cool bit of level design presentation, I feel like in a way they've also played it very safe, because a lot of the level design comes down to a series of buildings that are very kind of obvious, simple buildings with simple structures inside of them. You'll get some cool visual design stuff here and there, some cool bounce light moments, a cool sewer with like weird giant pipes everywhere, and it's going for something a little bit different. And had I not heard about all of the past history with them sort of mood boarding the artist anti-real and having to settle out of court with them about the things that they plagiarized, I would have been a little bit more intrigued by their art department. I know, yes, they did in fact settle, but I think also it was kind of settling under duress, because Anti-Real said themselves they didn't have the money to pursue legal defense, so this was sort of one of those cases where they didn't really have any leverage, and Bungie is massive, and they're backed by Sony, and I mean, if they're going to get a check out of it, I'm sure they would want something rather than nothing. But they said it was settled to their satisfaction. I think that's sort of like a legal way of saying, this is what I was required to say to make sure things keep going the way that I have some control. I'm reading into it there. I don't know any of that, but they'd never be able to disclose that anyway, so I just don't give them any credibility or trust. Bungie have had issues with plagiarism in the past. I think it was 4 instances of plagiarism over 5 years prior to this situation. It's not good. And even if they did compensate the artist, I think that the kernel of what made the game interesting from an artistic direction perspective came from them anyway. So that sucks. As far as the actual game feels in practice, the gameplay loop of it, as I compared it to Witchfire, I prefer a PvE style game, and this has some PvE elements as well as PvP. I mostly played it solo, which I was told after the fact is kind of not a good idea, because it's balanced seemingly for trios, and I didn't really want to get involved with playing with other people, so I was just kind of running around getting murked by various robots, big clunky boys running around the map. Surprisingly difficult, but as I said, I think it was designed for having 2 other people watching your back, and I was just running around by myself trying to use choke points effectively and learning the awkwardness of managing these characters and their inventories. And one of the major complaints I had about the game is the UI design is, I want to say, bordering on atrocious. The developers have acknowledged that it's not a great bit of design and they are going to work on it more, but it's like, it feels a little unfinished, feels like they didn't really consider it super well, and they're kind of putting aesthetic over function, which I get they're going for flashy, clearly. They even have said, the developers have come out and made the statement that, like, they're aware that the art is kind of leading here, because they're not innovating terribly from a gameplay design perspective. It's very kind of by the books extraction shooter. You know, you get put into the map, you run around a little bit, you find some loot, you either shoot some other dudes or get shot, then you go to an extraction point and try to leave with the stuff you've got. If you succeed, you get to keep it for the next run, where you'll probably lose it then. And then, of course, the best people in the game have all the best loot and will probably kill you instantly, so I'm always a little bit confused about what we're doing with extraction shooters. It feels like there's no incentive or there's no counterplay to really get better or leverage not being at the top. Everybody at the top already has all the power to leverage against everyone below them. And I was also kind of feeling like I was lacking in direction from a meta perspective with regard to this game. The major thing you do seems to be work contracts. You're given little goals, essentially, like kill X people, find some object, do some objective, and then you get some experience points toward whatever faction you choose to align with. I didn't find that to be particularly that interesting. I mean, it's kind of like the bare minimum. It almost feels like the same level of effort they put into, for example, like an Overwatch 2 Battle Pass, or I guess we just call it Overwatch now again, where it's just sort of, here's an event, the event is do this thing that's basically just for engagement, and on you go. But as I said, I'm not like a massive fan of this style of shooter anyway, and this one seems to be tuned a little bit more towards the sweatier of those among us. I've seen a lot of comparisons to Ark and stuff, and I just don't really have... I don't have the background in those games to compare it to Hunt Showdown and that. Like, it's just not my thing. I suppose there's probably lots of things to really pick into if you know all of those references, and I'm probably doing a bit of a disservice to not have that background there. But just comparing it to the hundreds of other FPS games that I have played, yeah, I mean, it plays fine as far as the gameplay. Like, the feeling of moving and shooting, running around, looting things, it's all, like, fine. I got the feeling it's going to be quite content-bare, because, I mean, showing the 2 maps off is fine, and they were mostly okay as far as the design goes. Like I said, they weren't anything particularly shockingly cool. They didn't feel like they engaged a lot with Anything that could have really elevated it from, the old games. I know there are supposed to be references there, but they didn't really use any of the weaponry from old Marathon. I saw there's like a SFIT compiler in the trailer, but I didn't actually run into anything like that in the game. It was just these sort of generic robot guys running around mostly. And there's so many cool designs they could have used, like, even for the same purposes that they're using, like the ticks. They have a thing like a tick in Marathon in the old game that they could have used in place of those, but they just made a new thing for some reason. I don't know why. So my speculation here is this is one of those situations where it's a very niche game going after a relatively niche market, and I guess the hope is they're going to find new people and bring them into that community. But owing to the fact that it's a live service game, and owing to the fact that it's a Bungie game, and Bungie's now owned by Sony, and this game had a really rough development cycle, and I think nearly got cancelled at least once, if not twice. Speculation, yes. This is all speculation on my part, but I think that this game might be sort of getting set up to fail to a degree. I think there's lots of people who are loving it, and I'm not trying to downplay that. But I have to question, why is it $40? Why is there so little content? From what I can tell, because as far as I know, we're getting one additional map in the full release, so for a total of 3 maps. And I don't feel like that is enough, to call it a proper game that they want you to pay $40 or $60 for if you buy the deluxe one. What I think has probably happened here is Sony, at some point when they realized development was going poorly after all of this mess with the plagiarism and that, they had a meeting and they're like, okay, this is not going great. We're gonna get this to as polished a state as we can and push it out. And we need to get it out into the public so people can weigh in on it and we can work on it one way or the other. We're not confident in this game terribly, and we want to definitely charge a fee to get in. Like, most of the other competition, they're doing free-to-play. We're going to put a $40 price tag on it. And we're going to hope that you can bring in some people, but even if you don't, the people you do bring in, at least, are going to start to kind of retroactively make up for the dev costs here. And so what I'm thinking might happen here is they've already sort of planned, baked into the design, that maybe this is only going to last for so many months or years, unless they can be proven wrong. It just seems like there's too many things awkward and unfinished and unconsidered for it to be in the state they want it to be going live and ready to be embraced by the community right now. The bones are there, yeah, but it feels like we're at the very bare minimum state of things to actually get it to retail. And the reason I think this is jumping out at me is, like, I shouldn't say obvious. It feels obvious, but it's just a feeling. It's just vibes, man. It seems to me like the same sort of thing that happened with Overwatch 2, where we came to find out after the fact that, like, they scrapped so much stuff. It's years worth of work got scrapped and put in the back burner, and they tried to recycle that stuff in the years that followed after launch. But they basically had to get, like, the very minimum thing to put out that they could call finished, and then hope that they could figure it all out after the fact. And I'm getting the same kind of feeling here about Marathon. Yeah, it's a kind of an okay, interesting enough aesthetic. I don't think it's quite as wildly cool as people are making it out to seem, that just haven't really looked very hard for this sort of stuff. There are other, art circumstances where people are doing this sort of work, and it's just maybe hasn't trickled out to everywhere. So I guess if you see it for the first time, it seems to register as either incredibly new and cool and bold, or I've heard people say that it makes them feel sick, which is a really interesting way to receive it. There's no shortage of, like, garish clashing colors, too, and I guess some people aesthetically really seem to prefer things to adhere more to a more naturalistic sort of, beiges and browns and kind of obvious military kind of colors. And I think they've built this into the lore that everything is 3D printed by rogue AIs, and they just have no concept of why things should look aesthetically a certain way. So it's to give you that otherworldly alien feeling. And I think from a design perspective, that idea is cool. I don't think it's carrying them as hard as they think it is, unfortunately, at least to me. And I don't really have much interest in playing the game anymore. I found it overly frustrating, way too much difficulty with regard to the friction of it. The UI really frustrated me. I kept getting killed by stuff that I didn't even understand, just landmines were randomly around, exploding mushrooms. I found a booby-trapped bag once, and I was just oh, I found some loot. Oh, I've died. There's no counterplay to that. It just sounds like, it's basically a mimic. I got a sort of a laugh out of it in a dark way, but I'm why did they do that? It's just not fun. And each time you die, you're back to the loading screens again, where you have to basically exfiltrate through a loading screen because you've died, and then you're gonna go wait for that. Then you've got to look at your inventory screens and all the stuff you've lost. Then you go back to the main menu, and there's organization screens there. 2 or 3 clicks through to that, and then you get back to, do I want to go again? Pick a map, pick your loadout, pick your shell, all of these things. And then load into the actual game, which has a bunch of strobing lights over and over again, which I get, again, for aesthetics, it feels cohesive enough, but there are certain things that aren't enjoyable to look at over and over again. And one of the graphics they kept showing was it looked a bit like maggots almost, but it was a moth eating this nutrient pellet. And I know that's, again, obviously connected to the lore and everything, and that's fine, but it's just not pleasant to look at. Not to say that it has to be pleasant to look at, but there are things that probably should be a little bit more on the neutral side if you're going to be staring at them over and over and over again, potentially hundreds and hundreds of times. And I just don't know if a lot of those decisions felt well thought out to me. And I'm certainly not going to be paying $40 for the game. I mean, if it was free to play, I might give it another few hours. But I'm also not really eager to see how the monetization rears its ugly head, and I know that's a thing. There is a currency in it. I didn't really see how you spend it. I don't know if it was even offered to be spent during the server slam. Probably going to hear a lot about that. Bungie knows how to do monetization. Apparently Destiny extremely monetized with shaders and stuff. And, that was another consideration I had as well. The fact that this is a live service game, right? Destiny has proven through previous work that, they're willing to take stuff and make it go away if it doesn't really serve the purpose of what they're trying to do, even if you paid for it. And what's been really awkward and a bit frustrating about the way that the community has been going so far, and the bit that I've been watching, it feels like everyone has to be a speculative trader about the future prospects of this game. You have to get out ahead of the narrative and understand, if I'm to spend money and or time on this thing, I want to know, being a live service game, they're not just going to sunset it in 3 months. And that part, it really sucks, because it's created this sort of paranoia undertone to everything. I feel like there's become this cult-like behavior going on in the subreddit, where if you're not praising the game, you're part of a problem that's gonna make the game not exist. And I hate to break it to you folks, but and I'm not saying to anyone in particular, but it might be the case that Sony's already decided the fate of this game, and maybe Bungie entirely, on the back of stuff that already happened. It might just be about how much can we recoup from the launch of this game with our planned support period, and then maybe they'll be surprised by that, and maybe they can reevaluate. But the whole thing feels really crappy, and the fact that it's a live service game with story elements tied into it, I really want to stress, every live service game will eventually be taken offline and disappeared. Whether we want it to or not, it's just a matter of time. And if I wanted to kind of right the ship here as far as the game industry is concerned, I would be more than happy to press the single button here, if that was such a thing, the theoretical button that would nuke every possible live service game simultaneously, even the ones I like, because they're not healthy. They're some of the most predatorily monetized games. They go away, and then we have no more access to them ever again. They create hyperbolic vitriol and frustration among the user bases, and ultimately leave us high and dry, right? I don't know why we keep incentivizing these sorts of games. And I have to wonder if this sort of frustration, this do I want to place my bet on this game, is part of why there's such a frustration about stuff like Highguard or Concord. Why do so many people seem to want to root for these games to fail? Well, they see some things that aren't really aligning with their expectations, one, and two, they probably don't want to be asked to get invested in the next big corporate game that they're going to then be left holding the bag about, right? Why would you want to pay into a game that's going to just go away? So it's almost easier to pull the Band-Aid off before the game's even out, decide it's bad, start creating a hate campaign around it, and dogpile it. And so now I'm seeing sort of a counter response to that sort of response where, yes, I think there are people who genuinely do enjoy Marathon and did get a lot out of the Server Slam and are pretty eager to play more of it. I shouldn't say this because it's a sort of a mean thing to say, but I feel like it's better for all of us not to dogpile positivity onto things for the sake of trying to, I don't know, prop up these massive corporations to have a successful product at our behest. It's not for me to say, obviously. I don't get to decide these things, but I wish we could, like, get on board and use our leverage to decide for them that we don't want more live service crap. And please figure out a way to not make these all get sunsetted and put away eventually. I just wish that we could use that power, understand we even seem to have that. So, yeah, I've been just watching the responses on the Reddit, and it's just been super weird. I've noticed every time I left any even relatively negative comment, the whole thread gets nuked, which seemed kind of crazy. I don't know if that's a coincidence or what, but yeah, kind of heavy-handed. Maybe they're doing some very severe community image management going on the Reddit or something. I don't know. So, my end thoughts here. I shouldn't really want Marathon to fail because that's a mean thing to do. A bunch of people work pretty hard on the game, I'm sure. And poo-pooing all their work just because I don't ethically align with some aspects of it isn't really a nice thing to do. I am also sort of selfishly a little bit biased in that I wish I got a narrative marathon instead of a live service game extraction shooter marathon. You know, a series of things that really feel like they have very little to do with the game that I knew and loved from back in the day. It's possible I'll be completely wrong about this, and maybe in 2 years' time it'll have tons more content. Maybe their gambit will play out the way they want, and they'll end up being able to fill in the gaps. And maybe the enthusiasm just will be so strong it'll carry them. But I feel like a really hardcore extraction shooter with a fast time to kill focused on PvP isn't the type of game that's going to bring in a massive crowd of people and sustain that crowd for a long period of time. I think it could bring in a reasonably small but very passionate group of people who will extol its virtues in every possible corner of the internet. And maybe that's enough, but, like, it isn't enough for Bungie. It isn't enough for Sony. It isn't enough to sustain perpetual infinite growth in the capitalist system that we happen to exist within. And I don't know how they get out from under that. 1 year, sure, maybe. Maybe 2 even. But do they have the ability to create such a circumstance that they can monetize this game indefinitely as a live service for a perpetually growing revenue stream? And I just don't know. It doesn't sound like that proposition makes sense to me. But, yeah, I probably won't be playing it. Maybe I'll revisit this in the future if it goes free to play. I kind of wanted to just get my thoughts down and hear if I'm just a troll hater-ass idiot. Because sometimes I feel like I am. I'm just following my heart. I really wanted to like Marathon, and I wanted to give it a shot, and I just kept finding myself very frustrated by the gameplay, so, like, I'm just being real. I don't think it's for me. I don't think that means I should necessarily hate it, but I do not like what it stands for in terms of the way the industry works and live service games and monetization and all that, so... Yeah, it may be being a little hyperbolic in the way I was talking there, but at the same time, there is a kernel of truth to it, too. So, let me know what you think. I'm curious. Did you love it? Are you gonna ride or die for Marathon? Were you never spurned by Destiny in the past? Did you... Because keeping in mind, right, like, this isn't the same Bungie that made Marathon in the first place. These are all different people. The Ship of Theseus... for every one of these studios, really. How many people were, like, still in their positions from 40 years ago? Or 30 years ago, I guess. Not too many, I imagine. Probably a couple. Anyway, thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed my thoughts. I will see you soon. Have a good night. Bye!